Pine and Gilmore really talk about turning services into experiences. But I'd like to talk today a little bit about experiential goods. Pine and Gilmore present the idea that experiential marketing is all about services into experiences. But my argument is that goods are also products that can be turned into experiences. So let's go back to the beginning. Remember, we started talking about all products having three kinds of benefits: functional benefits, symbolic benefits, and experiential benefits. And we said experiential benefits were benefits that stimulated the mind or body, and that could come from services, but it could also come from goods. And so let's talk a little bit about turning a regular good, like an automobile, into an experiential good. Here's some examples. The first we have is the Ford Mustang story. In the late 50s and early 60s, there was a comment that was made by Henry Ford himself that said, Ford is selling safety and Chevrolet is selling cars. Sales for Ford were lagging in the early 60s. It looked like perhaps Ford might end up actually having to go out of business. The task of coming up with a new automobile that would sell fell on the shoulders of Lee Iacocca and a handful of engineers that he had put together as a team. They generated something called the Ford Mustang. The Ford Mustang was something very different than what Ford was currently selling. The Ford Mustang was a sporty, fun, lightweight, inexpensive automobile. And it turned out it was simply fun to drive. In the first 2 years, it sold 1.2 million automobiles, an unheard of number at the time. How did they sell those cars? Well, the word got out that Mustangs were fun. They were, in fact, Ford's foray into experiential goods. Another example is the Mazda Miata story. As most of you know, Mazda makes sort of econo-box automobiles and SUVs. They perform well enough, and they are a relatively successful car company. They used to make a car called the RX-7, which was a sports car using a Wankel engine. But they discontinued that automobile, and a few years later, one of the executives at Mazda got the idea of Mazda making a sports car in the true experiential realm of classic British sports cars. Triumph TR6s, Triumph Spitfires, and MG Midgets. As you can see, I have some pictured here. And Mazda went out and decided that they were going to make an automobile in that true experience. A convertible 2-seater rear engine drive with a sporty engine and an automobile that handled really well. They came up with the Mazda Miata. Mazda executives were very wary of producing this automobile because they didn't think there was going to be much of a market for a 2-seater rear wheel drive sports car. But they produced it, and it sold like crazy because it was just like driving a modern British sports car, only it didn't leak oil and it didn't break down all the time. Chevrolet decided that they needed to block that car, so they decided to produce an automobile to compete against the Mazda Miata. Their entry into the market was a Z24 Chevrolet Cavalier, pictured here. As you can tell, Chevy never got it right. When it came down to whether it should be a 2-seater or a 4-seater, they said 4-seater. When it came down, should it be a rear-wheel drive or front-wheel drive, they said front-wheel drive. When it came down to size of the car and how it handled, they made compromises in hopes of gaining a larger share of the market in each case, and in reality, never were able to produce anything that even felt like the experience of driving a British sports car. My final example is the Harley Davidson. I did some work with Harley Davidson in the early 1980s. And Harley Davidson used to have a motto back then, and that is, the engineers and designers at Harley Davidson can change the Harley in any way that they would like, except it still has to look like a Harley, sound like a Harley, and ride like a Harley Davidson. Harley Davidson does not believe that they sell motorcycles. They make and sell Harley Davidsons. And they argue that there is no experience of driving a motorcycle that is the same as driving a Harley Davidson. So the people at Harley Davidson truly get the idea of an experience. In their case, the Harley Davidson experience. So let's go back to designing any experiential product. For instance, an example might be a restaurant. Remember what the key elements of this is. That is, what should the core experience be? What should the product look like? That is, what should the restaurant look like? The design, color, features, music playing. What should the food taste and look and smell like? All examples of designing an experience that is a service. But the same thing applies if you're designing experiential goods like cars, computers, clothes, sporting goods, etc. The same elements would come into play. Let's look at an example. This is an example of designing a golf driver. The driver in golf is the club that hits the ball the furthest and is usually the club that you start the hole with. That is, you tee the ball up and then you hit it with the driver. And so, while we're going to talk about the golf drivers, it could be any sporting goods, softball, bat, tennis racket, bowling ball, etc. What are the key elements that deliver the core experience? It's critical to understand the core experience. So you might want to ask yourself, what does a person want in a golf driver? Well, they want something that hits the ball a long way, is straight, will lower their scores, increases their confidence that they will hit the ball right down the middle, and perhaps some other things. So what should a golf driver look like? Well, it should look like a golf driver, right? In the sound is probably important. And, and what should it taste like, smell like, and feel like? Well, taste and smell don't come into play, but certainly the way the club feels does come into play. So when they got ready to design this driver, the first question is, what sort of design should it be? Shape, new looks, new features, something that has new graphics on the club. What should the thing look like? And of course, here I have an example of the brand new tailor-made driver that has a huge bar across the bottom that's really designed to move the weight further back in the golf club and theoretically provide a lower, deeper motion of inertia that will help the ball go straighter. What color should it be? Traditionally, golf clubs were always wood colored or black. Then about 10 years ago, the color that suddenly became the most popular was white. And there are some reasons why white drivers became popular. Then it went to two-tone golf clubs. And now we're back to the original black golf club. Here is an example, of course, of a matte black colored golf club. Another question might be, what kinds of features should there be on the club? And of course, these features are all designed to help provide cues about how the club will perform. Here's an example of the Ping Max 400. This golf club was made about 3 or 4 years ago by Ping. It has been Ping's most successful golf club in the last 30 years. The single most successful driver that Ping has designed in the last 30 years. Here are the features associated with the marketing of this club. First, they talk about the larger profile and the fast shape. And of course, these are two things that are designed that have to do, of course, with how the club looks, including the lines, the lines and the graphics on the golf club and its matte black finish. They also talk about the sound. That is, how does it sound? Well, it has a sound that makes it seem like the ball, like when you hit it, it is really hit solid. Then they have a number of other features. All of these are put together to try to convince the potential buyer of the experience that this particular golf club will deliver. So in summary, are we sometimes sacrificing function for experience? The answer is sure. That happens a lot with design of cars. It could happen with golf clubs. It could happen with a number of different products. But at the end of the day, people buy goods because of the experience they provide the customer. What would the product look like if Steve Wynn was in charge? Of course, what would the product look like if Disney was in charge? Or maybe more appropriately in the goods category, what would it look like if Stephen Jobs was in charge? So experience marketing is not just about turning services into experiences, but all products, including goods, services, and other marketed products, are also potentially experiential. Often, goods like automobiles, furniture, cell phones, and even stationary bikes like Peloton are all experiential, along with other non-traditional examples like not-for-profits, clubs and fraternities, and even political movements are all experiential.